We are welcome all. We're glad to be together to learn this evening from Cameron Cox. Many of you who have been longtime ASCA birders will remember Cameron from when he and I were teenagers and birding in Arkansas. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Cameron, that you got your start in birding on an ASCA field trip um, to Bayou Meto and have gone on to do great things since then, and including writing most recently Terns of North America, published by Princeton University Press, which has made it onto a number of top 10 or top 5 list for a year that was rich with lots of bird books. And so Cameron's here to teach us something about terns and their identification and why we should appreciate this group of birds. So, Cameron, I'll turn it over to you.
Sounds good. Give me just a moment to get my screen going. And actually, I consider Reagan calling me to go into Pinnacle Mountain ostensibly to hike, but we actually ended up birding, and that is what I credit as my first time birding when we were 13, and very shortly after that, yeah, I did a Reagan and I and several others did a trip with Mel White with Audubon Society of Central Arkansas, and that was my first sanctioned field trip, and now I've been birding for 30 plus years since then. And Reagan's correct. I just published this book in October. It was a product of 9 years of very inconsistent work. Could have been done much more easily if I had allowed myself, been a little more focused and a little more on the ball. But it took me 9 years to finish this book, and while it did take me a long time, I'm happy with how it turned out. And we're going to launch to this in just a moment, but I do want to say thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. Hope everybody enjoys this. We can do questions as we go along, but it might be easier to hold them to the end. I'm pretty flexible, so if you have a question that won't wait, feel free to let me know. I'm going to let other people monitor the chat. If anything pops up on the chat, we can deal with that at the end as well. So we're going to talk about terns, which are one of my favorite groups of birds. And one of the things I love about them is they're so photogenic. And this photo was a photo that we're looking at right now. It's a photo by what I think Haley Daly is one of the most talented young photographers in North America. The way she plays with light is really, really interesting. And this is a photo of a common tern. And it just kind of goes to show, if you have a little imagination with photography, you can do some really interesting things. And one of the reasons why I chose to do a photography guide, that and the fact that I can't draw at all. So if I was going to do a guide, it was going to have to be a photography guide. So this is me and my co-author. She just got locked up in the bedroom because she was being loud. She was loud pretty much the entire time I was writing this guide. Anytime I got into a flow state and was really being productive, she was there to distract me. Her name's Caddy. She's a good girl. So this is basically what terns are, how you organize them by families, and forget all that. Terns are just a sexy gull with a sushi obsession, so we don't need to worry about all this. And what my guide is in a genre of bird guides called family guides. So it's a type of guide that just addresses one family of birds. And because of that, it can go into a great deal of detail about one family of birds. Here's a couple of guides that are other family guides that some people may be familiar with that are similar in their approach to my guide. And here's a copy of my guide on the left compared to a field guide, a typical field guide. And you can see it's a little bit larger, gives images a little bit more room to breathe. And then you look, this is the interior of the National Geographic Guide, which is a great field guide. I really enjoy using it. In fact, I remember the summer that I was 13, the first summer that I started birding, sitting on the floor of Reagan's room looking at the old second edition National Geographic Guide for a big chunk of the summer. But this, if you look at this, we've got 3 different species that are really complex, some of the hardest terns to identify, all covered in not a great deal of space. They make really good use of space, but with terns, there's a lot of variation. And while you can kind of cover the basics with a guide like this, you really can't cover all the variation that you'll see in the field. What having a family guide does is it allows you, this is just the first page of my Common Tern account. My Common Tern account includes 25 photos specifically for common terns. And then beyond that, throughout the book, when I use common terns are in over 50 photos. When you count, there's a special section specifically for the small, medium-sized sternoterns. And there's comparison photos through other accounts because common tern is such a ubiquitous bird. It makes for a good comparison. So the Terns of North America came out in 1996. Terns of Europe and North America came out in 1996, and it was the last time there had been a guide to terns. And this was mostly done from a European focus. And it was also not particularly beginner friendly. So I was trying to create a book that had more up-to-date information and presented it in a way that was maybe a little bit more fun, a little bit more oriented toward North America, and a little bit more beginner friendly. And here's my book compared to the old Tern book, and it's still a little bit larger, a little bit room for the images to breathe. This is my second book. My colleague Ken Behrens and I did this Peterson Reference Guide to Seawatching. And as we battled with this Seawatching guide, we really learned a lot about the process of doing books. I learned a lot about what I want to put into a book, how I want these books to be structured, how I want to teach. And so when I started this Tern guide, I had a pretty good idea of what I was trying to accomplish. That being said, it still was a struggle. But what I really wanted to do was, first and foremost, it's an identification book. I don't go into a lot of information, detail about life histories or that sort of thing. So there's other resources like Birds of North America, Birds of the World that cover that information. What I wanted to do was really carefully and thoroughly cover identification and do it in a fun way. And I base that identification method on the way I look at birds, which starts with size and then goes to structure, behavior, and looks at plumage traits last because they tend to be the most variable and they tend to be the ones that are most likely to cause you to make errors. So I start with size, I go to structure, behavior, and plumage traits, and that's how I kind of laid the book out. I wanted to create, choosing these photos, you have to keep, the photos are the core of a photo guide, of course, and so you have to keep your tenets in mind as you are selecting photos for the book. So this is a crappy photo, but it creates a lot of information about these two birds. We have a laughing gull, which is just ubiquitous along the Gulf Coast where you find many terns and along much of the Atlantic coast. And here we have a royal tern right next to it in the back. And that royal tern is actually larger than the laughing gull. And it kind of gives you a lot of information about the size of these birds. And these are two species you're very likely to see side by side in the areas that they live. So it's a useful photo, even though it's not a beautiful photo. When I could choose beautiful photos that also had identification information in them, I always tried to choose beautiful photos. And this was a photo that I found, and I just knew I had to have this photo. I was really struggling to get photos of, this is elegant tern from the West Coast, from Southern California. And I was really struggling to get photos of elegant tern with these full black caps. Most of the time, most of the year, they have a white forehead. So this not only had the black cap I was looking for, it's absolutely stunning. And it tells you something about these Salacious terns, the way they dance and the way they're just absolutely ridiculous in the breeding season. And for me, bird identification is exciting. Looking at birds is exciting. I still enjoy birds after 30 years of doing this. And so I wanted to create a guide that conveyed that excitement and was entertaining and was not a book that people would only look at when they absolutely had to. And so this photo from Kevin Carlson, a great photographer and birder from New Jersey, who doesn't love baby birds? So you have this tiny little least tern with its even tinier baby, and it's a joy. This is a photo from my co-author, of my Seawatching guide, taken in Iceland, and it tells you so much. I chose this photo because it hits all the points that I was looking for. It tells you a lot about the places that Arctic terns are in the summertime. You have these beautiful lupins that just speak to Arctic tundra behind this bird, and there's motion and there's excitement and there's a wing cut off. But you know what? This photo still speaks to me, and I just absolutely love this photo. So it's in the introduction to the guide. This is a photo of mine that was also in the Seawatching book from the dry tortugas. And again, I actually have this photo up on my wall. It's tells you so much about these birds, and actually shows you this bird is coming into land. You see this enormous tail. Normally when you see these noddies, the tail is closed, but you see it here used as a break as this bird comes into land. And it just highlights what a different bird this is. Noddies are not terns. I put them in this guide because they were traditionally considered terns. They are a family. They are a family. You sort of think about them as the geese of the waterfowl world. They're as different as geese are from ducks, maybe even more so. The Noddies are probably more different from terns than geese are from ducks. But this photo is both interesting and beautiful, and so I justified using it in two different books. But if you're going to do a photo of a bird close up like this one, you need to create the context by seeing it the way you're more likely to see it in the field. And this photo of mine from Aruba is both a good representation of how you see brown noddies in the field, but it's also got the wave action, so it's fun. But that spike, don't do that. That was rude. That spike-like tail that you see is much more characteristic than the widely spread tail that it's using here to break. Aleutian tern is a bird that has been found 3 times in British Columbia, but other than that is only found in Alaska. And I spend my winters in South Texas. but I spend my summers and falls in Washington and Oregon in the Pacific Northwest, and I'm still hoping to find one of these birds offshore. But in the summertime, this is from Nome, Alaska, just an unbelievable species, closely related to sodium bridle tern, actually. And we only are just learning where they spend their winters. So it's also got a bit of mystery to it. They have a silly call that sounds just like a house sparrow. It's such a weird call for a tern. This photo is actually wild because I was really struggling because, like I said, we don't really know where they winter. They're pelagic. They're somewhere out in the great expanse of the Southern Pacific in the wintertime. But a few years ago, weather condition caused a bunch of Aleutian terns to wreck on the north shore of Australia, and they were found by a birder there. And a bunch of Australians went out, and it was the first record for Australia. They went out and got photos of this big group of Aleutian terns. So that was going to be my way of getting winter plumage Aleutian terns in the book. So I contacted the guy that originally found the birds, and he was going to let me use his photos. And then when it was time to actually get the photo from him, he tells me that he has had a hard drive crash and he no longer has the photos. He just has the little version of the photo from eBird that he uploaded to eBird, and I can't use that. I need a higher quality. So then I had to go find a new photo, and I found this gentleman who is Swiss but is an expat living in Australia. And this photo has some really cool characteristics to it. You see how the tails are all stuck up in the air. This was a trait that I noticed looking at Arctic terns in Alaska, and I was really interested to see that they do this in the wintertime as well. Most terns hold their primaries, these parts of their the wings sticking out behind the body. They point them down, but these Aleutian terns point them up, and they even curve a little bit, which really emphasizes that upward trajectory of these primaries. And it's totally different from Arctic tern, which practically drag their primaries on the ground when they're sitting there. And Arctic and Aleutian terns are the only terns found together. So this was something I learned in Alaska that you could use to identify these birds from a long way away. And it's here in this photo. So I was like, great, this is exactly what I need. And this gentleman agreed to let me use this photo. And then when it came time to get the photo, he was in the middle of an Australian flood, and I couldn't reach him. His internet was out. His house was literally in the middle of the water had risen all around his house, and it was basically he was living on a tiny island surrounded by water. And literally within days of publication, the water receded. He got internet back. He got back to me, and I was able to get the photos. But it was touch and go. But I ended up loving this photo, even though with all the hassle I went through to get it. This is another photo. This is from Kodiak, and I went out to get this photo on Kodiak, and I actually found a colony of Aleutian terns. Was going out to get this type of photo when my camera strap broke. My camera fell on the highway. It hit so hard that it bounced twice, and of course it was completely ruined, and I didn't have a backup camera. So then I couldn't photograph the Aleutian terns, and I had to find this photo, which is actually really difficult because birders are mostly in Alaska in late May, June, early July, and these birds are not they don't have juveniles until later in July or August. And so there's not a lot of birders up there. You had to find a local birder. And these birds are Aleutian terns are mostly, as their name suggests, in pretty remote places. So there were very, very few photos of this plumage. They go immediately after, as soon as they can fly, they go to sea, and nobody sees them for months. But I finally found this photo that I couldn't get on my own because I broke my camera. So Aleutian tern disproportionately was a a pain for getting photos, but it's such a cool bird. In the process, I found this while I was looking for Robin Corcoran's photos. When I got her juvenile Aleutian tern photo, I found this photo. And these Arctic terns are such cool creatures. They fly from pole to pole. They see more sunlight than any creature on Earth, but they mostly migrate offshore. And to see a migrating flock like what this is, these birds are coming in the spring, getting ready to take up and breed in Alaska. And to have this photo and have it in comparison with a short-billed gull was so cool. I knew I had to have this photo as well. Just a really rare photo that really tells you a lot about and this is actually looks a lot like migrating common terns. Migrating common terns look very like this as well. So it's cool to see. And then this is another Kevin Carlson photo. Kevin has been super instrumental in my career as a author and as a birder. And I wanted to honor him with putting as many of his photos in the guide as possible, especially if they look like this. These black terns are so cool. They're just gorgeous to watch. And they actually are the only North American tern that puts its nest on floating mats of vegetation. And so they're really, really susceptible to, if someone is running a motorboat through an area of marsh or lake where there are black terns, they can very easily flood because they're literally laying their eggs on little floating mats of vegetation and raising their kiddos, these cute little brown fluff balls on floating mats of vegetation. And it's one of these things, this bird is in decline just because we're draining marshes and because of other human activity. But it's just such an incredible creature that is so worth our time and our effort to whatever we have to do to save it, that there's still little black tern babies on floating mats of vegetation for years to come. It's my guide is an identification guide, but I also want to highlight just these things are incredible. Also incredible, also not really a tern. They've been considered terns in the past. They're totally different from terns. They're their own family. But because they're really cool and because they've been considered terns in the past, I included skimmers in the book. There's 3 species of skimmers in the world. They're the only birds in the world that have laterally compressed bills with the tip of the bill of the lower mandible is longer than the upper mandible. So the 3 species of skimmer are the only birds that show that trait. And they use that lower mandible to cut through the water like a blade, and then the top snaps down when they touch something, snaps down like a mouse trap to capture fish. Usually they do a little bit better on fish. This one isn't winning any awards at a fish catching tournament, but I thought this was really, really cool. They also have vertical pupils like a cat, so they actually time their feeding based on tide, not on time of day. And as the tide changes, it's at a different point in the day. Can be day, could be night, could be morning, could be evening. They need to be able to feed at night when the tide is favorable at nights, or be able to feed in the day when tide's favorable during the day. And so they have the ability, like a cat, to expand or contract their pupils and take advantage of a lot of different light conditions. The only other birds that have these vertical pupils, which you can't really see in this photo, but is a cool trait about skimmers. This photographer, just an incredible, someone who is really focused on tern behavior, and on top of that is an excellent photographer. and gets images like this. And I found him late in the process, and I ended up using multiple photos of his just because this is what I love about terns. These plunge diving, this bird is on the breeding ground, going back to a breeding territory. It's catching catching these little small fish, probably a species of sand lance, and then stowing them in the back of their bill like a puffin, and then going and diving and getting another one and another one. It's just incredible. And there's so much movement in this image. It just conveys what I think is special about terns, what I think is special about birds. And another one, this is Roseate Tern, and this is another one of Alex's photos. He's a photographer, like I said, photographer from New Brunswick, Canadian photographer, and he happens in Roseate Tern happens to be one of his and one of my favorite birds. They're so cool. And again, this just kind of highlights how beautiful they are. And this is not a beautiful photo. This is one of my photos. Most of my photos are not beautiful photos. My photos are useful photos, and I let people who are talented like Alex and like Haley and like Kevin Carlson take the pretty photos. But this is a semi-palmated plover. These are several semi-palmated plovers with this least tern, and it really gives you a feel for just how tiny these things are. It tells you a lot about this species. And this one is my photo. This is the cover of the guide. And these least terns, this is a male presenting to a female to gain her approval. And by their doing this, they're just making the biggest racket you've ever heard. And when I took this photo, I had no idea it was years and years ago. I had no idea it was going to become the cover of the guide, but it is fun. This is a Forster's tern. This is like a really classic photo of a Forster's tern. Forster's terns really frequently land on posts and on other things, while common terns, the species that's very similar to them, do not. And so I was highlighting that, but this is also a special image because this is when I took this image very shortly after meeting my wife, and she took me out in a boat. I ended up falling out of the boat, but not ruining my camera, fortunately. But this is taken from a boat in New Jersey while I was out on the boat with my wife for the first time. This is a photo from the same summer when she and I went up to Cape Cod. And I took her out to Cape Cod, which is one of my favorite places on earth, and for the first time. But I love photographing terns in Cape Cod. The sand there is really characteristic. You have these waves. This is another photo from that trip to Cape Cod. And I can talk about the identification traits of juvenile common terns and adult common terns with this photo, but it's also a fun photo, and it's also very characteristically Cape Cod. I love the way the sand at that location, Race Point, the tip of Cape Cod, makes these kind of interesting waves. It's another, again, one of my favorite species, roseate tern, with these bright cherry feet against that Cape Cod sand. And digital cameras are not particularly good at capturing the pink flush of roseate tern. Hi, my cat's joining the Zoom. But this particular sandwich tern, roseate, elegant, and sandwich terns all have can have this very beautiful, very subtle pink flush. Sandwich terns typically in the early spring roseate terns all year round, but particularly strong in the summer. And elegant terns just are weird. They can show it at almost any time of year, but digital cameras do a real poor job of capturing it. So this particular individual was pink, and it just barely shows up in the printed version of the book. But it was something I was really gunning for, was to get one of these really pink birds just to show this pink flush, carotenoid flush. This photo took an unreasonable amount of time. One of the criticisms when reviewers were looking at this book is I didn't have enough of these types of photos, and I was like, if you know how long it took to create a photo like this, you would see why there's only a few of them. But this is the sternoterns, which are the most difficult terns to identify. In general, most terns are not very hard. Most terns are pretty easy. The sternoterns, the medium-sized terns, are the only real exception to that. And there's a few others, but really it's just these sternoterns. And upper left is common tern, upper right is Arctic tern, lower right underneath the Arctic tern is roseate tern, and bottom left is Forster's tern. All adults, all in roughly the same kind of posture. Some are adults, and I have one of these for juveniles too. But just by comparing them side by side, you can see there are some differences, maybe more differences than are generally recognized. So it was worth the work, but it was a pain. This is more the way I'd like to do my comparison images in the field. This is a really characteristic Gulf Coast scene with black skimmers, with sandwich terns, with royal terns, with some common terns and Forster's terns as well. This is the kind of scene when you get something like this. This is a great opportunity to learn, to see these birds side by side, to see how they behave, and to see how light affects their appearance. And as a bonus, there's two shorebirds. I don't know if you can see right here, where my bottom right, there's a sanderling, and all the way over on the far right, out of focus, is American oyster catcher. So gulls, terns, skimmers, these shorebirds are often found in the same spot. This was a really cool experience. Something you don't get to see. Gall-billed tern, the bird on the right. This is a juvenile gall-billed tern. Gall-billed tern is one of those birds that's always a little bit scarce. There's a few places in Louisiana and on the Texas coast where they can be pretty abundant, but in general, it's a scarce species. It's a coastal species. And the bird in the center there is a juvenile sandwich tern. And I had never thought about what the differences were between these two birds until I was photographing for the book. And this gall-billed tern plunked down right next to this juvenile sandwich tern. And I was like, wow, they're actually more similar than I would have thought. But also, if you look at what are called the tertials, these feathers that are right above the wing feathers, their protection for the wing and the tail. That's the purpose that they serve. But the sandwich tern there in the middle has dark centers to these tertial feathers, and the gall-billed tern to the right has totally plain tertials, and it was a completely unknown trait to me. And then I saw them in the field, and I'm like, some of the things I thought were different are not different, but this is really different. So it was a learning experience. And that's one of the great things about doing one of these books is over the course of the book, you learn silly stuff that maybe doesn't matter, but is fun, and it feels like you're making progress, you're breaking through. And at the time, it feels really good to have these moments of learning. This is a great photo. Jason Denisovich, a person that I didn't know, but like someone who's like friend of friends. But I was going through and I was looking, really struggling to find good comparison of these sterna terns, because I just believe in comparisons so much. I was looking for good comparison photo and found this, and it's actually not that in focus, but it says so much about these two birds that I had to have it. So you have this Arctic tern on the right, and the trailing edge of the flight feathers on the right hand wing, I hope my little pointer is showing up here, but is narrow and really, really long, extends all the way into the inner primary. So it's this long, narrow, very well defined trailing edge. And then the upper wing is really uniformly pale. On the common tern, the trailing edge is shorter. It doesn't go as far into the inner primaries, but it's broader and it's kind of got a blurrier border. And then there's more black on the upper wing of the opposite wing. The bill on the common tern is longer and has a lot of black on it. The Arctic tern has this very red bill with almost no black, a very just sharply defined cheek. It's just all the classic field guide traits are there in this image. And it's just a cool image, so I wanted to grab that one. Again, this is the Mark Daly photo, and this was one of the few professional photographers that I used one of their photos, and this is just stunning. This is a friend of mine, a guide, Doug Gotchfield, and this is another photo. This is a species that I have never seen. And closely related to American black tern. It's a species that shows up usually once or twice a year, sometimes on good years, 3 years in the US. So it's a rarity, and one that I really should have seen at some point, but it's been a nemesis bird for me. And look at these things. They're just absolutely stunning. This photo is actually from Israel. You would never get this many in the US, but some of the ones from the US are just as pretty as these guys. And it's a dream bird for me. It's my most wanted bird. This roseate tern is a member of that Sterna genus that I mentioned, where they're the group of terns that's actually difficult, can be difficult, but roseate tern is this outlier. And one of the traits that they have is they have this spike-like bill. It's just really long and narrow and extremely pointed. And it's black for almost all the breeding season, where the other terns go orange or red at the base. And roseate tern waits until July before their bill changes. So through all of spring and early summer, they have a black bill, and that makes them one of the things that makes them easy to identify. They're the most unique within the Sterna genus. This was just kind of I mentioned in the guide that this is a sandwich tern, is a tern that needs to eat a sandwich because they're just so scrawny. And this was a photo that kind of showed this scrawniness, and it's completely different from its near relative royal tern, which is this big athletic looking species. Sandwich terns by comparison are narrow winged, and they have this really almost emaciated look. They're about to have their name changed. They're about to get split. The North American birds will get split away from the European birds. Sorry about that, folks. But for right now, there's still the sandwich tern that needs to eat a sandwich. Another roseate, just different age classes of roseate tern, and almost all roseate terns are banded. So in addition to all their other traits, one of the things I do when I'm looking for roseate terns is if there's a big group of terns, I'll just scan through the legs and look for leg bands. And then once I find terns with leg bands, I'll see if there's a roseate tern attached to the leg band, because nearly all of them are banded. This was the day I got my 700th ABA bird. It was years ago. And this greater sand plover showed up in Florida, and I just happened to be at Florida at the time, so I drove across the state to get because I knew it was going to be my 700th bird, and this super rare Asian plover seemed like an ideal 700th bird. But when I got there, this was before I was working on my guide. There was all these royal terns that were just acting ridiculous and flying around and making all this noise and dancing and just putting on an incredible show. And this is an image from that day that I still really treasure. Elegant tern. Again, I was looking for specifically for elegant terns with this full black cap, and this is another photo. It was just like, yeah, gotta have it. And then I met this guy for the first time a couple of weeks ago. We were standing in the middle of a chigger infested field, and I didn't even know that I was standing next to him. We were looking for a fan-tailed warbler that had showed up in South Texas, and we eventually got the fan-tailed warbler. I also got to meet this guy in person after the book was already published. This is just what I like. This is an example of what I like. This is a common tern in the front, royal tern in the back. And this is how I like to look at birds. It just gives you the difference in size. You can see the family similarities of terns and the complete dissimilarities as well. Just a fun photo. This is juvenile, common, and Forster's terns. Really shows the differences. Do you need to cut in, Reagan? Okay.
No.
Then we've got gall-billed and sandwich tern. These are similar in size. Getting a little bit of feedback. I'm going to see if I can change where I'm at. This is another situation where gall-billed tern plunked down with sandwich terns, and you can see this really high crown, rounded head shape on the gall-billed tern there in the front compared to the much flatter crowns of the sandwich terns. And just serendipitous luck allowed me to get a photo of these birds that are really similar in size, and can be confused at a distance, but photos allow you to capture these differences in a really tangible way, and comparisons really kind of throw the differences in your face. This is a bird I actually had to take this is another boat situation. I had really struggling to get juvenile gall-billed tern photos other than that one that I showed you earlier. And I had someone volunteer to take me out to a breeding colony off the coast of Georgia, and I got this image is what I was really going for juvenile gall-billed tern. But I also got this image just by happenstance as we were leaving the dock that morning, and it's another favorite image of mine that just kind of speaks to coastal areas and this crazy species of bird and just how cool it is and how it's lives in this environment, is just adapted to doing this completely unique thing that's also visually stunning. And again, it speaks to my love of birds, my love of these birds in particular, and just how fascinating they can be. And with that, I'm going to wrap up, and I'm going to thank Audubon Society of Central Arkansas for hosting me, to all my photographers that allowed me to use their images, to Princeton University Press for at first agreeing to publish the book and for all the work they did to make the book look as good as it did, and to all of you for your attention this evening. I appreciate it. You can see what I'm doing at birdingabc.com. I'm a guide in the Rio Grande Valley for day guiding, including the Santa Margarita Ranch, which is just this unbelievable ranch in Starr County in South Texas, where we have all these mega rarities: bare-throated tiger heron, brown jay. Most recently, I had a crane hawk there. I'm doing some shorebird workshops in South Padre. I guide in Oregon and Washington in the summer. I go to various places abroad. If you're interested in any of that, you can email me at the email below. If you're interested in my book, you can email me at this email. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them right now.
Thanks so much, Cameron. Any questions? You can just unmute yourself and ask them, or put them in the chat. I've got one quick one while folks are thinking about their questions. One is why the bans on roseate terns?
They are an extremely well studied species. They're really interesting. They are what is called a remnant species. There's a population in the Caribbean that extends into the Florida Keys. In the US, the main population is in New England, but between the Caribbean and New England, there's no breeding birds in anywhere. There's no breeding birds in the Gulf of Mexico. You get over to Europe, and there's in Western Europe, there's scattered populations. And then they're breeding down in South Africa, and they're breeding in Southeast Asia, in Australia. But there's all these spots that would seem like they'd be perfect where they're not breeding. And the hypothesis is that this used to be a much more widespread species. And what we're looking at with these weird populations all over the world are remnants. That's where it gets the name remnant species from. But because it's a pretty scarce and declining species, it gets a lot of attention from for conservation attention, and a lot of the colonies where they breed, there's a lot of banding efforts, and so they're able to. Most of these roseate terns get banded when they're babies. They'll slap a band on them before they can fly, and they're much easier to deal with when they're running around on the ground before they can fly. So banders will go out there and just nab them and put bands on them. And then for a while, we didn't really know where they were wintering. Now we know they're pretty much wintering off the coast of Brazil. They were banding on Long Island, these birds, and they were trying to figure out where they were going. And they got to this, there were researchers were looking all over South America for these birds. And then finally they got to this village, and the fishermen were wearing necklaces of bands. And they recognized them as these roseate tern bands. And the local fishermen thought it was really cool to capture and kill these terns that had these weird things on them. And then once they found these areas where the terns were, they actually were able to do kind of a public service thing with the local villagers there, and get them to stop doing that and actually conserve the terns. And so that's a conservation success story, but a really interesting story. Helen Hayes she's retired now. She's at she's been retired for a while, but she was the researcher that kind of spearheaded that really interesting story.
Yes.
Thanks, Cameron. Other questions?
I've got a question. What places are on your bucket list to still get to?
Oh, any number of places. I've not traveled nearly as much as I would like to. I would really like to see spoon-billed sandpiper. I was going to go to Thailand. Had a ticket to Thailand, and then the Thais rioted. They took over their airport. That trip got canceled. So Thailand is kind of the place people see spoon-billed sandpiper. There's some really incredible. They're actually shrimp ponds that are just loaded with shorebirds in the wintertime, and that's where people find. Though those places are last few years, there's only been like one spoon-billed sandpiper there. It's gotten to be much more difficult. So that would be a place. I really want to do Africa, but I love Costa Rica. I just got back from Costa Rica, and despite everyone on my tour getting sick, we actually had a great time. And while there are many places in the world where I would like to still go, I like going back to spots because you get to learn. You get when you go to a spot for the first time, you pick up so much, and then you go back and you have to reinforce that, and you pick up new stuff the second time and the third time and the fourth time. And so I love going back, specifically to Costa Rica, Panama, Ecuador, places I've been a number of times before. But Brazil's calling me, Colombia's calling me. There are plenty of places in the world to go.
Good. And then we'll look forward to the next books.
Yeah, I don't have a solid project right now, but I do have ideas for several additional books. We'll see. Hopefully I can start churning books out at a faster pace than every 10 years. That's what it's taken me 20 years to do 2 books. So I need to speed things up a bit.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
My question is, where did you see the crane hawk? Were you around Harlingen?
I live in Harlingen, but the crane hawk has been seen upriver about 2 hours away. This place called the Santa Margarita Ranch.
Yeah.
It was initially found on January 29th at this little town called Salanena, which is about 1.5 miles upriver from the ranch. And then I was guiding at the ranch on Tuesday or Wednesday, I forget. Anyway, I was guiding at the ranch, and this, I really wasn't expecting to see this crane hawk. It showed up out of nowhere. This is a bird that's the second for the US, both records from Texas. The last one was in 1988. It's a bird that I have seen in Latin America 6 or 7 times, and I think that over the course of those 6 and 7 times that I've seen this crane hawk, I have seen it for those times in Latin America added up to about 45 seconds. And so it tends to be a difficult bird to see. Hold on just a second. Let's figure this out. How do I get out of this? I can get back to my desktop. I could show you a picture of it.
Well, I looked it up. It's a beautiful bird.
Yeah, it is absolutely a beautiful bird. And like I said, you don't usually get good looks at it. It's a very secretive species. So you don't usually get good looks at it, but happen to get good looks, really good looks this past time. And
I know.
did that photo come up, or are we still not seeing it?
Not yet.
Okay, sorry. Oh well, I was trying to show the photo, but my adeptness with Zoom is not the best. So unfortunately, I may not be able to figure it out.
Well, I think everybody has like birds of the world or something. None of us are good at Zoom.
Yeah.
So
Go to my Facebook page. I South Texas birding with Cameron Cox. I got the photos are up there. But yeah, it's just a really incredible, really weird bird, sort of similar. It's got really long legs. It sticks its legs in holes, similar to the secretary bird. Not as extreme as a secretary bird, but it's just a wacky bird.
How did you document it? Who in your group saw it?
Somebody mentioned saw that they had this raptor and asked me what it was, and I was like, "Holy cow, that's the crane hawk!" And then like I said, managed to get. I actually got some of the better photos that have been taken of it because we had such extended views of it. And the bird,
Wow.
when it was first seen, was pretty cooperative for the first day, and then it was just not around. People have been looking for it ever since, and it was really, really tough for a while. And then we just so happened to get this great looks at it. And I mentioned there's just brown jay is this enormous tropical jay. It's super, super common throughout the tropical lowlands. But it just barely gets into Texas, and there's like 5 individuals in Texas, 4 of which are on the Santa Margarita Ranch. And the brown jays found this crane hawk, and they were chasing it all over the place. And so the people on my tour were getting scope views of these 2 super rare birds interacting with each other. It was really, really an awesome experience.
Right.
That is great. Thank you. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Well, Cameron, it's been really great to have you back with ASCA, and really appreciate your presentation. And yeah, if any of you are looking for a tour or down in South Texas in the winter, hit up Cameron or one of his other birding courses. So I think we're going to move to